The reading glasses on my face were a prop. I don't need them to see. I wore them because they make me look softer, younger, less like the woman who spent the last 8 months quietly building the case that was about to dismantle my brother's entire life in the next 40 minutes. The living room of my father's house smelled like old wood and his pipe tobacco, even though he'd been gone since March. My aunt had arranged the furniture into a loose semicircle facing the fireplace. 14 members of my family sat in that circle: cousins, aunts, uncles, my grandmother, all of them dressed in the dark, careful clothes people wear when they expect money to change hands. My brother sat at the center of it, one ankle crossed over his knee, his arm draped across the back of the chair, where his girlfriend perched like a decoration. He looked like a man hosting a dinner party at a house he already considered his own, which, I suppose, he did. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I am a licensed CPA and a practicing tax attorney specializing in estate and trust law. To my family, I am the daughter who left the one who moved to Chicago at 22, who missed holidays for depositions, who called dad from airport terminals and hotel lobbies. To the IRS and the families I represent, I am the person you call when someone has been stealing from a dead man's estate and doesn't know you know. My brother's name is Daniel. He is 37. He stayed. He managed the hardware stores my father built from nothing over 40 years. He sat beside my father at every Sunday dinner. He coached my nephew's Little League team and showed up to every neighborhood barbecue with a case of beer and a handshake for everyone. He was, by every visible measure, the devoted son, the loyal one. He was also the one who had moved approximately $340,000 out of my father's investment accounts over the past 3 years, using forged withdrawal authorizations and a secondary account he'd opened in my father's name, a name my father couldn't dispute, because he'd had a stroke 18 months before he died and couldn't speak. I set my coffee cup on the side table and watched Daniel explain to my grandmother that the estate was more complicated than expected. There were some losses, he was saying, his voice full of that careful, practiced sorrow that I recognized immediately, because I'd heard it in depositions. It's the voice people use when they're managing a story. Dad's accounts took a hit during the market dip last year. I've been working with the attorney to figure out what we're dealing with. My grandmother nodded slowly. She was 81 and still sharp, but she trusted Daniel. They all did. He'd had years to build that. The beach house, he continued, and I felt the room shift slightly, the way a room does when the real point of a meeting finally arrives. Given the debt situation with the estate, it makes the most sense for it to transfer directly to me. I'll maintain it. Keep it in the family. He reached over and squeezed his girlfriend's hand. She smiled the smile of a woman who had already chosen where she was going to put the outdoor furniture. My aunt made a soft sound of agreement. My uncle nodded. Nobody looked at me. I had been sitting in the same chair for 40 minutes, and had said exactly 4 words. Before I tell you what happened when the estate attorney walked through that door, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever sat in a room full of people who should have protected you, and watched them hand everything to someone who had a better smile? Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this one reaches. I did not argue. I did not raise my hand. I did not produce a single document from the leather folder resting against my calf. I had learned years ago, watching witnesses fold under cross-examination, that the person who speaks first in a contested room is almost never the person who wins it. So I sat, and I listened, and I let Daniel finish his speech about the market dip and the debt situation and the burden of managing the estate alone. He was almost done when the front door opened. Margaret Chen walked in carrying a briefcase the color of old bourbon. She was 63, the senior partner at the firm where I'd clerked at 24, the woman who had taught me that a clean paper trail was worth more than any courtroom argument you could make. She had flown in from Chicago that morning. She was the estate attorney my father had retained 2 years and 4 months ago, without telling Daniel. "Sorry I'm late," she said. And she wasn't. She was exactly on time. We had planned it that way. Traffic from the airport. Daniel looked at her with the polite confusion of someone encountering a variable he hadn't planned for. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Margaret Chen. I'm the executor of Robert Hayden's estate." She set her briefcase on the coffee table, the click of the latches clean and final. "And you are?" Daniel's smile tightened at the corners. "I'm his son, Daniel Hayden. I've been managing the estate." "I see." Margaret opened the briefcase without looking at him. "We'll need to discuss that." What happened in the next 20 minutes was not dramatic in the way that movies are dramatic. There was no shouting, no overturned furniture, no tears. It was quieter than that, and somehow, worse. Margaret read the updated will in the measured, unhurried voice of someone reading a utility bill, and the color left Daniel's face, 1 degree at a time. My father had changed his will 28 months before he died. He had named me sole executor and primary beneficiary of the estate, including the investment accounts, the hardware store business, and the beach house. He had done this quietly, without telling anyone, and he had done it because 6 weeks before he filed the paperwork, he had called me from his office at 11 o'clock at night and told me he thought someone was moving money. He didn't know who. He said he felt foolish suspecting his own son. He asked me what I would do, professionally, if a client came to me with this suspicion. I told him I would open a parallel account with a different institution, flag the original accounts for monitoring, and document every authorization going forward with a notary present. There was a long pause on the phone. He said, "I see." 3 weeks later, he called Margaret. I had not seen the updated will until 6 months ago, when Margaret contacted me after the funeral. By then, I had already started quietly reconstructing what had happened to the estate. Not because I knew anything for certain, I didn't. Not yet, but because the numbers my brother had given me at the funeral didn't add up, and I am constitutionally incapable of letting numbers that don't add up simply sit there. I had spent 8 months building a picture that was now sitting in a sealed document packet inside Margaret's briefcase, with a cover letter addressed to the probate division of the county court, and a courtesy copy flagged for the IRS fraud division. Daniel was still staring at Margaret when she finished reading. "This isn't the will," he said. His voice had lost some of its evenness. "The will I have on file, the one from 2019, was superseded," Margaret said, turning a page. "Your father executed a new instrument in October of 2022. Witnessed, notarized, filed with the county clerk's office. You're welcome to verify the filing number." She set a single sheet of paper on the table between them and slid it forward without ceremony. Daniel picked it up. He read it. He set it back down. For the first time since I'd arrived that morning, he looked at me. I looked back at him the way I look at tax returns that have already told me everything I need to know. My aunt broke the silence. "Daniel, what is this? What does this mean for the beach house?" "It means," I said, and it was the first full sentence I had spoken all morning, "that the beach house was never Daniel's to transfer." My aunt turned to me with that particular expression, the one relatives reserve for the person they've decided to be disappointed in. "Claire, this isn't the time for—" "It's exactly the time," I said, and I kept my voice very level, the way I'd learned to do when I was 26, and deposing a man 3 times my age, who kept talking over me. "Because Daniel has been telling this family for 6 months that the estate is in debt, that the investment accounts lost value, that there's almost nothing left." I reached down and opened the leather folder on my lap. "I'd like to show you what I found when I looked at the actual accounts." This was the part Daniel didn't know was coming. He'd known, in some abstract way, that I had legal standing as executor. Margaret's presence had made that clear. What he didn't know was that, 8 months ago, I had filed a quiet petition with the probate court to review the estate accounts for the period beginning January 2021. He didn't know, because the petition was sealed, pending investigation completion, and because Daniel had never imagined that his younger sister, the one who left, the one who wasn't there, would spend her evenings in her Chicago apartment with financial statements and a forensic accounting software license, working backward through 3 years of withdrawals the way a surgeon works backward from a scar. I placed the summary sheet on the table. It was 1 page. I had learned that 1 page is always more devastating than 50, because people actually read it. "Between January 2021 and the date of my father's death," I said, $342,000 was withdrawn from his primary investment account and his business operating account. The authorizations were signed in my father's name. I paused. My father had a stroke in September 2021 that affected the motor control in his right hand. He couldn't write more than his initials after that. I have his occupational therapist's records. The room had gone very still. "The withdrawals continued through 2022 and 2023, I continued. "The funds were transferred to an account at a separate institution, opened in my father's name, with a secondary authorized user." I looked at Daniel. "Would you like to tell our family whose name is on that secondary authorization? Or should I?" Daniel stood up. When people stand up in the middle of a conversation like this, it is almost never because they have something useful to say. It is because their body has decided that the only way out is up, and their brain hasn't caught up yet. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. His voice had a new quality now, not the smooth, managed sorrow from earlier, but something tighter, with pressure behind it. "Those were management expenses. I was running the business, Claire. I was here. I was the one dealing with everything while you were in Chicago billing $400 an hour. $350, I said. "And I know what management expenses look like. I also know what they're called when they're taken without written authorization from an estate account and routed through a secondary account registered to a family member." I let that sit for 1 second. "They're called embezzlement, Daniel." My grandmother made a sound. Daniel's girlfriend stood up and put her hand on his arm. I noticed she'd stopped smiling. "This is insane," Daniel said, and the word came out too loud, bouncing off the walls of a house that had absorbed 37 years of his voice. "You come back here after Dad is dead. After everything, you didn't even visit when he had the stroke, Claire. You sent flowers. Flowers. And now you're standing in his living room with your briefcase and your papers trying to act like the executor of his estate?" I asked. "Yes. That's exactly what I'm doing. I want to stop here and tell you something about Daniel that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. He wasn't purely a monster. Some of what he said was true. I hadn't been here. I had called from airports and sent flowers and scheduled visits I canceled for depositions. I had told myself for years that Dad understood, that he knew I was building something, that we'd have more time. We didn't have more time. That part I carry with me, and I'll carry it for a long time. But grief and guilt are not the same thing as permission. And my absence was never an invitation. My father had known that. That's why he'd called me at 11 o'clock at night and asked me what a professional would do. He hadn't called Daniel's side of the family. He hadn't called his attorney first. He'd called me, because he knew that whatever I was, wherever I was the one who would follow the numbers all the way to the end. I reached into the folder and produced a second document. 3 weeks ago, I said, I filed a referral with the IRS Fraud Division regarding the unreported income from the secondary account. A separate referral went to the state probate court regarding potential estate fraud. I set both cover sheets on the table. Margaret has the complete filing, the account records, the withdrawal authorizations, the handwriting analysis comparing the signatures on the post-stroke authorizations to my father's pre-stroke signature samples. I looked at him steadily. The discrepancies are significant, Daniel. He was looking at the documents on the table. His jaw was working. His girlfriend said, very quietly, Daniel, I need to know what's happening. He didn't answer her. My aunt said, someone needs to explain to me what is going on right now. What's going on? My grandmother said, in the voice she used when she'd heard enough. Is that Daniel has been stealing from Robert's estate. She looked at my brother with an expression I had never seen on her face before, not anger. Exactly. But something colder, like the withdrawal of something she'd been extending for a long time. That's what this is, isn't it? It wasn't a question. Daniel sat back down. The energy had gone out of him the way it leaves a room when a window opens in winter suddenly. And all at once, he sat in my father's chair, in my father's living room, and he looked at the carpet. I was going to pay it back, he said. His voice was very small now. You don't pay back estate accounts, I said. You account for them. Margaret cleared her throat gently. At this point, I'd recommend that everyone allow the legal process to proceed. Daniel, you'll want to retain your own counsel. The probate court will be in contact regarding the audit. She began gathering documents with the brisk efficiency of someone who has delivered news like this before and knows that the most useful thing is to keep moving. Claire, I'll need your signature on the executor acceptance forms before I leave today. My aunt was crying softly. My uncle had his arm around her. My grandmother was looking out the window at my father's garden, which was starting to go overgrown because Daniel hadn't arranged for anyone to tend it. I signed the forms at my father's kitchen table. The pen in my hand was one of his, a heavy silver one he'd kept in the drawer by the phone. I don't know if he'd have wanted me to use it for this specific purpose. I like to think he would. Daniel didn't try to stop me. He didn't lunge for the documents or tear anything or make any of the dramatic moves that people in this situation sometimes make when they're trying to buy time. He just sat in the living room with his girlfriend, who had stopped touching his arm. When I came back through, he looked up at me. I was the one who was here, he said again. Not aggressive this time. Just tired. I know, I said. It doesn't mean anything to you that I was the one who drove him to chemo and sat with him and managed everything while you were. It means something, I said. It means I'm grateful. It means I wish I had been here more. It doesn't mean what you took was yours. He looked away. His girlfriend said, with the careful voice of someone making a calculation, Is the beach house? Is that completely off the table? I looked at her for a moment. Then I picked up my leather folder. Get a good attorney, I said. And I walked out of my father's house into the cold November afternoon. My father's car was still in the driveway. A 2009 Buick with a dent in the back panel from a parking lot incident he'd never gotten fixed because he said it gave the car character. I stood next to it for a moment and let myself feel what was under the adrenaline, not triumph, nothing that clean, something more complicated. The satisfaction of a thing finally documented and the grief that had been waiting behind it, patient as water behind a dam. I had done what he asked. I had followed the numbers to the end. On the drive to the airport, my phone rang. Margaret, probate filed the freeze on the secondary account this morning, she said. I didn't want to say in the room, but the IRS moved faster than expected. The funds are secured. Good. The business accounts are intact. Your father's instinct to open the parallel account when he did it limited the damage. He caught it before it got much worse. He was smart, I said. He trusted you, she said. Which is not the same thing, but felt more true. I hung up and drove for a while in silence. Outside, the interstate moved through fields that were the color of everything dying before winter. I thought about the phone call at 11 o'clock at night, about my father's voice, which had the careful, deliberate quality it always had when he was trying not to show that something scared him. About the way he'd said, I see, after I explained what he should do, as if I'd confirmed something he'd been hoping wasn't true. He hadn't asked me to come home. He hadn't asked me to be there when he made the calls, filed the paperwork, signed the new will. He had just done it, quietly. The way he'd done everything that mattered, the hardware stores built one location at a time over 20 years, the college funds he'd put away while we were still in elementary school, the calls he made every Sunday to people he said he just wanted to check on. He built things slowly and he built them to hold. He built me to hold, too. I was only just understanding that. When I landed in Chicago, I went directly to my office. Not home office. There was a deposition in the morning, and a client call in the afternoon, and a filing due by 5 o'clock on Thursday. The work had not stopped while I was away, and I was glad for it. I sat at my desk in the quiet building and opened my laptop and pulled up the estate file one last time. $342,000, now frozen, now documented, now a matter of public record in the probate court of a county I grew up in and hadn't lived in for 9 years. I closed the file. I opened a new document and started drafting the inventory of my father's actual estate. What was there? What remained? What could be liquidated? And what should be kept? The beach house. The hardware stores, which were profitable, despite everything Daniel had done, because my father had built them on fundamentals that were harder to steal than money. The investment accounts, diminished but not destroyed. I would not sell the beach house. My father had taken us there every August when we were small, before the businesses grew and the summers got complicated. I remembered the smell of the salt air and the particular quality of the light off the water in the early morning, when everything was pale gold and the day hadn't decided what it was going to be yet. I would fix the garden. I would hire someone, or I would do it myself. My father had grown tomatoes along the south fence, and I had not inherited his patience for gardening, but I could learn. I would not call Daniel. Not yet, maybe not for a long time. Not because I didn't understand his grievances or recognize the years he'd put in, but because understanding someone's pain is not the same as excusing what they did with it, and because my father had trusted me to be precise about exactly that distinction. Outside the office window, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in November, which is remind you of its own indifference in the most thorough possible way. The wind moved off the lake in long cold sheets, and the streetlights caught it and made it look almost silver. I poured coffee from the carafe on my credenza. It was cold. I drank it anyway. There is a particular kind of freedom in having finished something that needed finishing. Not happiness. Exactly, the situation wasn't happy. It had never been happy, and no legal proceeding was going to give me back the Sundays I had spent in hotels or the last conversation with my father before the stroke took his voice. Those things were simply gone. The grief about them was mine to manage, and it would be, for a long time. But the other thing, the thing that had been sitting in my chest, like a stone, since the night he called me, that was finished. He had asked me to follow the numbers. I had followed them, every single one, all the way to the end. The accounts were frozen. The will was filed. The estate was intact. I had done what he asked. I closed the laptop. I turned off the desk lamp. I put on my coat and took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the cold November wind and let it hit me full in the face. And I did not flinch, because I have never in my life flinched from weather. I walked home. Not to my office, not to a meeting, not to an airport terminal. Home. To the apartment with my name on the lease and my books on the shelves, and the tomato plant on the balcony that I had been failing to keep alive for 2 years, out of some combination of stubbornness and sentimentality that I was only now beginning to understand. I looked at the plant when I got inside. It was scraggly and determined and mostly doing fine. I decided it would live.